Just so you do a quick little intro and everybody knows who everybody is, do you want to maybe tell everyone, who you are and what part of the country or world you reside in?
Hi, my name is Hui. I've been on a couple of these before. I'm a research and insights manager at Datassential. I do short form content and I live in Chicago.
Yep. And Marie?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Marie Moldy. I live in Seattle. I head up product marketing for Datassential, and I'm also a registered dietitian. So I will be speaking to some of the nutrition insight at the end of this webinar today.
Yeah, and Marie and we are both such important parts of building sort of that foundation of knowledge that we have here at Datassential. And Marie in particular, with your health background, that has been so incredibly useful for us for so long. And I get the thing that always surprises me is there's really no clear consensus on what's actually good for you, right? And that always just blows my mind that, we could have existed as a species for as long as we have, all the history of human knowledge, all the advancements in technology, and there's really no consensus on what's good or bad. And one year something's good for you, the next year it's bad for you. I guess if I were to ask you, what are maybe some of the things that you find most frustrating about health knowledge as it sort of gets to consumers, what would be on that list?
I also want to pose a question back to you, Jack, and ask how you decided kale to be the thing that kills the guy in the video game.
Well, I think of that, so in the video game, right, you get more powerful when you eat hot chicken.
Yeah.
You get more powerful when you pick up hot honey. You become invincible when you pick up tahini. And I feel like someone who's whose body has been fine-tuned to become more powerful as they consume more and more fried spicy chicken.
Yeah.
Like that same person will probably, wither and die if they have too much kale. Right? Like that I think that's the biological engineering that's at play. So yeah, if you get kale in the game, you lose your ability to shoot your hot honey, which makes it really hard to beat all the monsters. So that was the thinking.
Yeah, well, my answer to your question would be along those lines too. I feel like nothing about nutrition is one size fits all. Everybody's different. So there's no diet that's right for everyone. There's no specific food that's, well, maybe I might say that kale is great for anyone who wants to eat it. But if you take a category, oftentimes you really have to consider minutia going on within food categories, and just there's not a one size fits all approach. There's a lot to consider. So you really have to weed through a lot as a consumer.
Do you think in 50 years, DNA diets will be the norm?
I guess
you'll have a highly personalized diet and let's say, vitamin and supplement regimen based specifically on your own DNA. Will that be the standard way that people 50 years is a long ways out, right? I guess a lot of time for change.
Yeah. And I guess it depends on how driven consumers are at that point too, because a lot of people want to eat what's delicious and maybe their health is secondary. So I think a DNA diet is probably for somebody who's really health motivated and they're trying to feel their best and optimize their health. But then those other people are still going to want to eat whatever they want all the time. So I bet we will see more of it though.
Yeah, maybe we'll see a little bit of both. So I think we should probably go ahead and get started so we don't run too long today. Hey, everyone, again, I would invite everyone to turn on your chat right now. As we've said from the beginning of this, going back basically 3 years at this point, this series is as much about you and the content you co-create during this hour as it is about the content that we have already pre-planned on a slide for you. So as we go through this, throw your ideas out, your feedback. If you disagree about something, great. Let's have a giant group, debate on the spot. I'd like to get you all started. Just so remember, when you hit chat and Zoom, make sure you select the everyone option so you're not just chatting back to we, Marie, and myself. And let's kick things off today by just putting in chat where you are, the city you're in, the state, whatever you're comfortable saying. And I actually want to hear what your ideal pizza is, right? Is it thin crust? Is it deep dish? What toppings go on there? Is it some bizarre thing that has clams and peanut butter? Part of what I'm trying to understand here is, does it all cluster around the same thing where everyone's going to say it's a thin crust, pepperoni and sausage? Or is there going to be tremendous amounts of diversity in what an ideal pizza is? And you can talk about anything, how crispy you like it, how thick you like the crust. Do you like tons of cheese on there? Do you like it healthy? Do you like it drizzled with olive oil? Do you like a big one, a small one? Just what is your ideal pizza? And I guess I would ask you, does that even exist in your mind? Like in your mind, like when you think pizza, does a certain pizza get conjured up,
Yes.
before all others? And what is that?
Absolutely. Yeah, no. Not only is there a specific variety of pizza, it's also, I can also think of a specific restaurant where I've gotten that pizza from, and I think about it all the time.
Do you care to share what that is?
Yeah, it's a place called Coal Fire in Chicago. They do like very thin, crispy pizza, and it's basically stracciatella, which is like a really soft, like melty cheese, and salami and hot honey, which is very ironic considering the video game we just played. But it's like super spicy, sweet, salty, really crispy, right, and smoky. And
So
we got
when
a
you
lot
get
of
like a
spicy honey
coal-fired
too.
pizza or something that has like all the char marks and stuff on the crust, when you get like char, is that actually bad for you? Like, is that carcinogenic or anything? Like it's
I've heard.
delicious.
That's what I've heard growing up. Like, do not eat the char bits; you'll get cancer, right? But eating decisions, as we find out, are not always motivated by health, and flavor has a lot to do with why we choose to eat what we eat. So
I mean, our one dog literally eats rocks and cat poo and is still alive, so maybe it's okay. But I mean, maybe that's a good thing for group, like for the group dancer. Or Marie, you happen to know? I mean, is it okay to eat the charred parts, or is there actually something negative about that?
I also eat the charred parts. I think I choose flavor in that circumstance.
Yeah, life is but a trade-off, right?
Jack,
Yeah.
I'm gonna quote Andrew from chat here, who says, "The more char, the better. What doesn't give you cancer at this point?"
That's true. And char was actually one of the fastest growing descriptors on menus a few years back, specifically in fine dining. They're like, we're just going to burn the crap out of everything, and people are going to love it, even if they die a little bit earlier. We'll see. Okay, today is March 2nd. Every day of the year is a different ridiculous holiday. Among the 50 or so holidays that are today, it is also Banana Cream Pie Day. And in keeping with the tradition of talking about ridiculous food holiday, actually, it's not ridiculous. Banana cream pie is quite delicious. I thought we would maybe just ask you all this. So in our flavor system, we catalog over 4,000 different foods, flavors, ingredients, food descriptors, you name it. And we're just looking at maybe a subset of the pies that we catalog here. And by cataloging, we mean we test with consumers continuously. Do you know what this item is? Have you had it before? Do you eat it a lot? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you fall somewhere in between? And I've hidden the numbers for everything but apple pie, at least among the pies on this page. You can see that 39% of consumers love apple pie. You can see banana cream pie on here as well, but I've hidden the numbers for everything else. And I'll tell you, of the pies on the screen, apple pie is the most beloved among American consumers at 39% love it. What do you all think is the second most beloved pie among American consumers of those that are on the screen right now? So there's 15 on the screen. One of them is apple. There's 14 others to pick from, including banana cream pie, which is the official pie of the day, national holiday today. But is it banana cream pie? Is it something else? If apple pie is number one at 39% love it, what is number two? And are we seeing any sort of consensus in these guesses?
It feels like every single option has been pointed out at least once in the chat, but I think the three most common ones are pumpkin, cherry, and key lime.
So very good answers. And would you say pumpkin was one of the most answered ones? Like,
yeah, pumpkin, cherry, and key lime.
Yeah, and pumpkin indeed is number two at 35%, and nothing else even makes it to 30%. Banana cream pie is not too far behind at 26%, but we're still mostly an apple pie country. Pumpkin pie is pretty high up there. I actually love like when they put like the cheddar cheese on the apple pie. That is absolutely delicious. We should do more of that. Okay, banana cream pie sort of a little bit lower. As we look at banana cream pie, it is one of those foods that it's been around for a long time, and there's many foods that fall into this category where its popularity has just sort of like slid a little bit over time. It's not trending up on menus. It's basically flat to moderately down. So it probably needs a holiday to get things going again. And you can sort of see some of the stats from our flavor tool here. 26% of people love. So I have a dog here. Then every time an airplane flies outside the window, he starts going after the airplane. So yeah, please don't chase the airplane. Anyways, 26% of consumers love banana cream pie. And if we look at this generationally, you can see The normative numbers here, higher number means they love it more, generally speaking. Like it's just much higher with boomers than it is with Gen Z. You can see each subsequent generation, the love of banana cream pie just continues to dip and dip and dip. So some of these things need to be reinvented if we want them to continue on as foods sort of in our ongoing national pastime. And I think banana cream pie is like an example of like one of maybe several hundred items that we see exactly this pattern for. Hasn't changed very much over time. Boomers love it. Gen Zers don't even know what the heck the thing is. Maybe we could reinvent it in some way. Okay, so a couple of quick things to cover. If you're not already using Report Pro, what the heck is wrong with you? If you are using Report Pros, I think most of you already are. There are some great new studies in there that are available for download right now. Our 2023 deep dive into food trends, almost 300 pages of everything you want to know about food trends for the year ahead, covering demographics, technology, health, social media, restaurant design, sustainability, and obviously what's happening with innovation and the menu. It's really fantastic, and it's available right now in Report Pro. We have a great new economic indicators report. This is more of like a digest of what's happening with the macroeconomy, which becomes more and more important as as each month passes and as we head into what might be a mild to a moderate recession. We'll see where that goes. But if you want to just keep up to date on what's happening at a high level, check out the economic indicators report, and we continue to publish updates for it every month. We also have a really great big picture factors report that just got published as well. It's sort of a look at the entire macro landscape. Like, what are the things that are happening more broadly in the country and in the world that'll have some impact on food, both food service and retail, the economy, changing political winds, technology, what's happening with wellness, the environment, people's lifestyles, just the big picture factors that we really should think about as members of the food community. And finally, not finally, there's a lot more in this, but we also have a really great deep dive into the world of desserts. 200 pages of everything you want to know about desserts from a consumer perspective, from an operator perspective, from a menu perspective. Anything sweet you could put in your mouth and that has, that you should be putting in your mouth will be covered in here. So come check it out. And it's all in Report Pro. Oh, I do want to mention this one too. Really awesome. This is a part of our Food Bites series. What you could learn from winning major menu items at major chains. What are some of the lessons that we've learned from some of the stuff that just really is appealing to consumers in terms of new items and LTOs on the menu. So check it all out in Report Pro. There's a ton of great stuff in there. I thought we would try something a little bit different today. The primary topic is going to be about how our daily lives have changed since COVID and what impact that might have on food. So normally it's, myself and maybe Mike or we or Marie or some other members of the really great Datassential team. We thought it might be fun. This might be total disaster too, so we don't know. I guess we'll see what happens. If maybe one of you wanted to just join us for the next 45 minutes or so and give your hot take on some of the things that we're talking about. So I want to just clarify some of the qualifications, some of the requirements that are needed should you be brave enough to volunteer. You got to have a decent camera, and the camera's got to be on. You have to have reliable sound quality. You can't be like me where you have a dog barking in the background. That's a no-no. You got to have stable internet. You have to be excited to share your opinions about things. Remember, there are no right or wrong opinions. There are just your opinions, and we want to hear it. And you have to love food and data. So might be that no one wants to volunteer, in which case we're not just going to pick on someone. If no one volunteers, no one does. But I'm hoping one of you meets all 5 of these criteria and would actually like to just join us for the next 30, 40 minutes and give us your take on some of the data we're about to present. So I have no idea what's going to happen. I have no idea if we're going to get a volunteer or not. And if you want to volunteer, just raise your hand in Zoom and we could see it. So Marie, are you able to see attendees and hand raises or anything like that?
I can. Yeah. We've got 2 so far. Catherine and Carol.
Oh no, you can't give their names.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna wait another 10 seconds, and anyone else that wants to volunteer, please lift your name and then raise your hand in Zoom. There should be an option to do that. And then we will randomly pick one of you, and we will we won't actually say we're sorry, but we are very sorry to those that were not picked, but you'll be with us in spirit. So let's give it 5 more seconds.
Yeah, we've got a couple.
This could be total disaster too. Like, what do we get? Like a psychopath or something? You know, that'd be really horrible. So hopefully, we don't get that. 2, 1, 0. Why don't you just pick someone and let's welcome our new friend aboard.
Actually, Jack, I don't think I'm able to promote them to a panel.
Oh, I got to do it. Okay, I can do it.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I will say one of these people who have their hands up were first to indicate their willingness in chat.
All right, so I'm going to promote someone to panelist and let's see what happens. This could be a total friggin' disaster. I have no idea what's going to happen now. So I hit promote to panelist.
We don't mind a little audience participation sometimes.
Yeah, why hit?
Everyone is on the edge of their seat, I think.
Mm-hmm. Just waiting for a 4th rectangle to pop up on this.
Oh, this could be terrible idea. But you know, you don't know it's a terrible idea until you try it sometimes. So let's see what happens. Well, I tried promoting someone. It looks like they haven't come back in yet. I guess I could promote another person. We'll bring 2 people in. You try that? Okay. I'm going to promote one more person and maybe. All right,
Or Jack, it looks like if you could make we or I a co-host, we can help try to promote someone too.
Okay, let's see. Make co.
Oh, okay.
Hey, look,
Someone joined.
Oh my God, this is scary. Carol, if you could hear us. Hi, Carol. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Carol, welcome aboard. Seriously, thank you for being so brave. You want to tell everyone who you are and where you are? You look like you're in a very, very professional setting.
So my name is Carol White, and I am the CEO of the New Mexico Restaurant Association.
Ooh, that is really, really cool.
Oh my goodness.
I love it.
I was in the restaurant business for 20 years, and I've been doing this for 20 years.
Well, thank you for joining us. So you're going to have like an expert opinion on a lot of this stuff, but I would invite you to give just your opinion. So you can do the expert thing or just like, this is what you're feeling. And if you want to relate it back to the New Mexico Restaurant Association, or just restaurants in general, by all means, that would be awesome. So let's get going. Cool. This will be fun. So we're going to talk about how our lives have changed and sort of like what our 24 hours looks like these days. Sometimes you get a little bit wild. And to me, I think we should just start with like just a little, what time are we waking up in the morning? Right. So we literally just fielded a study last week. So we're looking at very, very fresh data. There's 2 lines over here. And what we're looking at is the cumulative percentage of people that wake up by a certain time in the morning. And the green line is, you know, these days, the blue line is pre-pandemic. So if you're talking like, you know, pre-COVID, about what, 7.5% of people said they woke up by 5 a.m. Today, that's number up to about 10%. And you can sort of, oh, actually, look, it was about 7.1%. Now it's 10.3. By 5 a.m., this blows my mind. Who of you wakes up by 5 in the morning? I feel like that's so early. That's so incredibly early. But 18.2% of people pre-COVID woke up by 5, 22% today. So that number's higher. We were getting up earlier than we used to. And if you look at the numbers, 29% of consumers say they're waking up early today versus 21% saying they're waking up later today. I actually found this to be a little bit surprising, but we did verify this with some other sources that have also done sort of sleep studies and time of day studies that people are sort of getting up earlier. I would have thought the opposite because you have work from home and you can save some time on the commute and whatnot, but that's not proven to be the case. Carol, not to put you on the spot too much, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you waking up earlier or later these days? And what do you think consumers are doing overall? And why the heck are people getting up so damn early?
You know, I wake up at the same time, but I do a lot of work at home. Like I get through all of my emails at home before I come into work. So I'm not coming into work as early as I used to. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Marie, do you feel like it makes sense to you that people are getting up earlier? I can't understand why, but they are. I mean, we've seen this in other data sources as well. Are you waking up earlier?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, you're reclaiming your commute time, right? But some people sort of are. And the thing that becomes really sort of interesting is if you look at not just the time that people wake up by, but you look at the time that people fall asleep by, we've now sort of reversed things a little bit where the blue line is above the green line, right? And you can sort of see the numbers over here. Pre-pandemic, 44% of people were asleep by 10 p.m. Today, that number's dropped down to just about 37%. Pre-pandemic, 2/3 of people were asleep by 11. Now it's only about 60%. And it goes on and on and on, that people are sort of staying up later too. So they're getting up earlier and they're staying up later. And you can see it in the numbers. When we ask people, are you going to sleep later today or early today? 29% say they're going to sleep later, they're going to bed later. Actually going to sleep later. That's different than going to bed later, because you can sort of sit in bed, doing whatever you're doing in bed for quite some time before you actually fall asleep. But most people are more people are falling asleep later these days than falling asleep earlier these days versus the pandemic. So we have sort of a longer waking day, and we can ask very directly to people, hey, how much sleep are you getting? Are you getting more sleep, less sleep, or the same amount of sleep? 17% of consumers say their level of sleep has increased since the pandemic. Nearly 30% say it's decreased, and that leaves about half or so that say it hasn't changed. I think about myself and I'm like, you know what? I actually think I do sleep less these days than I did pre-COVID. Even though I don't really know why I've gotten there. And we're going to talk about why I think the actual answer is, but it's not like people are super busy with stuff that on paper sounds very, very important. I think we sort of become preoccupied with other things that just become part of our habit in a way, which robs us of a good amount of time. I mean, are you sleeping more or less these days?
I am actually getting more sleep than I did before the pandemic, just because I have less places to be, right? But yeah, I think we're going to get to a lot of those reasons later too. But a lot of folks in chat have really good suggestions for why these trends are happening, right?
What are we seeing in chat? What are some of the main theories that we're seeing?
Yeah, folks are saying, restaurants are closing earlier, so people aren't going out as much. There's less nightlife. People are getting home earlier. People have less activities to do, so they have less energy to burn, so they sleep less. Like, a lot of these theories are pretty sound.
Oh, that's interesting. If you have less to do, you have less energy to burn, so you sleep, so you don't need as much sleep to recover. Is that the idea?
It's one of the ideas. There are many in chat.
That's interesting. Yeah, maybe.
You know how people are always talking about Paul Rudd, the actor, and how he looks so young? I think he mentioned recently that sleep is his secret to youthfulness. So
I mean, doesn't LeBron sleep like 12 hours a night in a hyperbaric chamber or some like really crazy thing? I mean, sleep is super important. It's sort of changed, right? Like when I was younger, I thought you should sleep as little as possible, because each waking hour is more hours that you could experience life. When you're sleeping, you're basically like in suspended animation or dead, essentially. And when you want to spend as much of your time as possible doing stuff, then you start realizing, oh crap, this is terrible if I don't get enough sleep. Like the rest of my life is really quite awful. So I guess perspectives change. So people are sleeping less, and this is, I think, confirmed with some other data sets as well. We look at people eating. So this is actually pretty interesting, right? I mean, we think about breakfast, lunch, and dinner as basically daily routines or things that we do each day, but it's not really so much the case, right? So we ask people in a typical week, how many days of that week do you eat breakfast, eat lunch, eat dinner? And you can see that last section where it's 7 days. Less than half of people say they have breakfast all 7 days in a week. And the number's a little bit higher for lunch and higher yet for dinner. But you can see that there's, a good amount of meal skipping that is still sort of happening. And you ask, what is the impact of, let's say, being at home, maybe working from home without having the same structure that we have in life if we're in an office, or the same sort of time sort of laid out for us, or the fact that 33% of consumers generally skip breakfast or are close to skipping breakfast, right? 1/3 skip breakfast 4 days a week or more. They only have breakfast 3 days or less a week. So there's quite a bit of just, these aren't automatic occasions for everyone. What we have seen is increases in sort of between meal occasions, snacking. It's not even clear what snacking means at all anymore when we're all home so much. Like if you have a scoop of like nuts and you just toss it in your mouth, you know, is that a snack or is that like one chew of something and you do that 50 times over the course of the day? It is actually really hard to track snacking behavior because it means so many things. Like we graze a lot, don't we, at home? Like I'm gonna have like 4 potato chips, and then 8 minutes later I might have a couple more. Are those 2 snacking occasions? Is that one, you know, one continuous one? Who knows? So there are differences in our weekly eating rates. Now, the thing that's interesting is how many days per week do people eat these different meals? So 7 is obviously the theoretical maximum. And boomers are much more reliable on-schedule eaters than any other generation. Carol, do you think this is a function of age or the generation that people hail from that we're seeing this effect, that Gen Zers are less likely to consistently eat meals day after day and boomers are more likely to? Is it the age they are or sort of the generation they came from? What's your hunch?
I think it's the age. I border on the boomer generation and Gen X. And when I was young, I mean, I'd skip breakfast. I had coffee for breakfast. I'd skip a lunch easily. And now I have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you know, so I do think it's a factor of age.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with that as well. I mean, although I feel like when I was in school, I was forced to eat lunch every single day. And now I often just end up skipping it if you get sort of too busy. But I think you're right. I think it's probably more age than generation. Again, hard to know for sure, but it is worth knowing that some folks are just a little bit more consistent and regular than others. We actually featured this on our last session. I just want to do a reminder as we think about, you know, major meal occasions and day parts. People think that breakfast is supposed to be the healthiest meal of the day. It's the most important meal when things should be really, really healthy for you. I mean, look at that, 65% vote for breakfast over any other, you know, over lunch, dinner, late night, or snacks. So they think it's breakfast. You got to be healthy at breakfast, but no one eats a big breakfast. 66% of people say that dinner is their biggest meal of the day. So we're assigning the highest health importance to the smallest meal that we eat as a country. I mean, I would just sort of ask Marie, I know you commented maybe lightly on this last time. Like, you know, what caused this? How did we get here? It seems to make no sense to me because everyone says we want to be really healthy, but we've misapportioned when it's important to be healthy.
Yeah, so gosh, I think it does make sense to me that dinner is a bigger meal for people. I guess I think of my friends and family that I'm around, people seem to eat that way. I know there has been guidance in the past, like fuel up with a big breakfast and start your day right that way. But I feel like people are busy and they're starting their day maybe when they're younger, especially with coffee or just some sort of beverage. So I guess it says to me there's a lot of opportunity to try and make our breakfast a little healthier.
I mean, here's the thing. If you think about, let's say, certainly for restaurants, breakfast foods, that's not the healthy section of the menu typically.
Yeah.
Right? Like pancakes are literally a cake you make in a pan. Like that can't possibly be healthy. I'm not seeing tons of kale on the breakfast menu, right? There's not a lot of greens and stuff going on over there. There's a lot of stuff that's loaded with, you know, some pretty filling things on the breakfast menu. So hearty, maybe, but not healthy. So I wonder how much of this is just like industry messaging. You know, breakfast should be the most important healthy meal of the day or something, and just hasn't really processed with consumers. So we found an interesting thing. And before I show you the numbers, I want to see what all of your experiences are. Have you had at least one day in the past week where you didn't leave your house at all? Now, trips to your front yard or your backyard or your driveway or taking the trash out or something, that doesn't count, right? That doesn't count as leaving your house. Have you had at least one day last week where you didn't leave the house at all? What do you think? What percentage of our audience here do you think had at least one day in the last week where they just didn't even leave the house?
I'm going to guess, based on just the replies that are flying in, about 60 to 65%, I think, of people who had at least one day where they didn't leave the house. Maybe even higher.
We don't even need to field research anymore. I'm just going to ask you what you think because you got pretty darn close to the actual number. Let's take a look. I'm going to end the poll. 71% of you didn't leave the house at all for at least one day in the last week. That's, I think, sort of shocking, maybe not surprising though, because you were able to anticipate that a little bit, but also really deeply unhealthy, right? I mean, and this is not true of just this audience here. This is true of, I think, people overall. I mean, imagine like you're just in your house for that long and you don't get outside to do some of those, you know, things that you really can only do outdoors or in other places, even if it's just going to the mall or something. And let's see what consumers sort of say. So this is the number of days that people didn't leave the house at all. So there are a number of people that didn't leave the house at all. So 33% left the house every single day. They had 0 days where they didn't leave the house. So 2/3, right? The difference between that and 100%, 67%, that had at least one day when they didn't leave the house at all. Then you have like this 15% that had 4 or more days. 15% is a lot. That's like 1 out of every 6 or 1 out of every 7 people in this country spent more than half the week having not left their house at all that day. And these aren't generally mansions or anything, right? I mean, these could be, you know, small living spaces. Maybe they're not as, you know, as comfortable. Like there's a big world out there that we should all be participating in and seeing. And, you know, this is why we've long said, especially recently, that the battle for food is really a battle for the home as it stands right now. People are home more than they've ever been. We've made it certainly easier for them to order food to their couch with third-party delivery and whatnot. But what we've seen from the start of COVID, through the height of COVID, and even continuing until today in our post-COVID period, is the percentage of food decisions that originate inside the home has gone way up since before the pandemic. So I'm not saying that you necessarily eat in your house, but when that thought first comes into your mind, like, hey, I want to get something to eat, the percentage of the time that that thought dawns in your head when you're still at home is higher today than it was before the pandemic. It was much higher in the midst of the pandemic, but even after, you know, even in this sort of like, you know, post-COVID period, it's still higher. And it's because we're just in our house a lot. I think that's sort of an interesting thing, you know, we're just, they're doing stuff. And, you know, you can't talk about that without talking about maybe is this doing some stuff to like how lonely people are being. And this is super, does this panda look sad and lonely enough? Is that obvious? I was trying to find like a really sad looking panda. I think it's pretty sad, right?
It is, but I'm also just trying to count all of the digits on its feet.
Yeah, you know, AI art isn't perfect yet, and it does some pretty strange stuff. So yeah, it's like digits, or it has like that skin disease in Game of Thrones on the bottom of its feet or something. I don't know what's going on there, but lonely panda. Let's take a look. Human contact, right? How often do we have human contact with other people? 15% say that, you can see where this is going, right? You can see where this is going very, very quickly. 15% of people say they've increased their level of human contact with other human beings since the pandemic. Nearly 50% say their human contact has gone down. And of course, you have a smaller, you know, 38% that say it just hasn't changed. 47% decrease versus a 15% increase. To me, that's deeply troubling, right? This is not a small subset of the American population. This is the American population. Nearly half of us say that we've decreased our human contact, and it is nowhere near close to being offset by the 15% saying that they've increased their level of human contact. We are social animals, are we not? And, you know, we've largely got to where we are as a species through our ability to cooperate with others. You know, we're not the biggest, we're not the strongest animals out there, but we're really good at cooperation and collaboration and socializing, which makes us who we are. And we've lost quite a bit of that. So here's a question, and this is really fascinating. What percentage, given everything that we just saw, what percent, these numbers can add up to 100. What percentage of people do you think say they're more lonely today versus less lonely today compared to before the pandemic? So you can just guess the more lonely number, right? Because the less lonely number will be the difference between that and 100%. What percentage of consumers say they're more lonely today versus pre-pandemic? And I'm curious to see what everyone guesses. Are we seeing big numbers, small numbers? Carol, what do you think? It might be a trick question. I'm not going to tell you though.
Well, I'm kind of feeling like it is a trick question from the slide before, but I'm going to say that people are more lonely, at least 60%.
Yeah, I would have probably guessed that. I would have guessed like 70%, something like that. But it's basically a toss-up.
Wow.
And this is fascinating to me. Like, we have less human contact. We acknowledge that we're not leaving our house nearly as much before, but we don't outwardly state that we're lonelier than we were. So have we found maybe something else in our life that is artificially, replacing that human contact, perhaps, that makes us think we're not quite as lonely, but maybe isn't fulfilling us in the ways that, only other human contact possibly could? And this is a good place for an interesting detour. So we want to think about how this might relate to what happens with the way we eat and foods and whatnot. Who here watching has ever heard of this thing called Rat Park? This is so fascinating. It's like super, super interesting thing. So this is actually a series of sort of psychological experiments, sort of psychology and behavioral experiments done with rats back in the late 70s and early 80s. And prior to that, there was a body of research that was done where really to help understand addiction. And they would take rats and they put them in these really, really small boxes, just really sort of miserable looking. And they give the rats sort of two options. They'd have like a little like thing where they could drink water, and they have this other thing where they could drink water that had been laced with either cocaine or heroin. And what they found was that over time, the rats in these small boxes would start picking the heroin or cocaine water and would just get addicted to it and would keep consuming it to the point that they basically just die. Like they would just essentially kill themselves because they became so addicted. And that actually sort of led to much of the the drug policy that we had, the war on drugs type of stuff, where the belief was you can't get started, once you start down the road of drugs, it's you're screwed because you're going to be forever hopelessly addicted, right? And that became some policy. And then this other scientist comes along, I think his name is Bruce Alexander. He says, well, what if we sort of change it? Because this looks like a pretty miserable place to be inside that box your entire life. What if instead of putting the rats inside of a box, what if we build Rat Disneyland over here? What he called Rat Park, much, much bigger. It had 12 rats in there that you could play with. Had like a playground, like a hamster wheel. They even painted like nice little trees and stuff in there. And it's bigger than this probably image looks. It's literally like a rat Disneyland for all intents and purposes. And then they put the same two options there, like the water, just the plain water, and then they had, in this case, I think like morphine infused water. And what they found was in Rat Park, almost none of the rats went for the drug water. They just went for the good water, right? They didn't have to, they didn't feel compelled to go for the drug water or become addicted. So that was an interesting thing. Like, hey, if you put the rats in a different environment that's better, where they have socialization and whatnot, they'll take that healthier choice and the non-destructive choice. But even more interesting is if they took addicted rats that had been in those small boxes and put them in Rat Park, those addicted rats would slowly wean themselves off of the drug water and go to the good water instead. And this has sort of led to like a new line of thinking around addiction and behavior, which is that socialization is really so important. And a lot of the sort of chronic things that we see with addiction is largely a function not just of the underlying drug itself, but more specifically the quality of the relationships that we have with others, right? So if you use rats, humans, rats is sort of a surrogate for human beings in this case. And you start seeing this, I won't bother with this piece of data, but if you start seeing this in some studies where it says, hey, loneliness mediates the relationship between emotion dysregulation, and in this case, eating disorders and psychopathology, you start seeing that things happen with the way people eat, for instance, including some really unhealthy and damaging eating behaviors when loneliness starts to set in. So even if people don't outwardly acknowledge that they're lonely, I think there's probably something going on where we're putting more people into that really small rat box right now. And we're going to see some interesting eating behaviors, not good ones necessarily, emerge from that over the long run. And we're going to have to contend with that as an industry too, right? It could open people more up towards binges and other behavior, and also just dysfunctional overeating, even if it's not a disorder or something. I just think this stuff is going to become a little bit more common as loneliness sets in. So That was our Rat Park detour, but it does sort of inform some of the other things that we see pretty clearly in the data as well. We've seen changes in energy levels too, right? Only 17% say they're feeling more energetic today versus over 40% saying they feel less energetic today. That's a big, big change. We're sort of like zoning out and just zombifying ourselves a little bit. And here's the interesting question. Has life gotten better since the pandemic for people? 21% say it's gotten better, 40% say it's gotten worse, and about 39% say it's about the same. So by a margin of 2 to 1, people say that life has actually gotten worse since the start of the pandemic. And again, this is brand new data that was fielded just last week. So we're way out of COVID at this point. We're in that, the major post-COVID period. So this sort of gets us to a conversation about like people's routines as well. I mean, haven't all of our routines changed? Carol, it looks like, is that I forget, that is a home office you're in, or is that a?
No, this is my office. I'm back at work.
You are back at work. Is all of your association back at work, or is work from home a common thing right now?
No, it's interesting. My whole staff came back. I didn't want to come back, but I figured I better be here. So
yeah, that sort of happens. Well, I would imagine that many of us that are watching right now have shifted to work from home, either full-time or part-time, and that's probably changed our daily routine, right? Less time spent commuting. We might have spaced our day out a little bit more in certain ways. So what do you think? Would you say that your current routine that you have now, do you think it's better or worse than the routine you had before? What do you prefer, your daily routine these days, or what your daily routine was before the pandemic? Now, this is fascinating to me because we hear people saying their life has gotten worse since the pandemic. We see people saying they have less human contact compared to before the pandemic. But do people like the routines more or less these days? What do you think, Marie?
Personally, I prefer mine these days. I do miss seeing all of the great people at our office, and it was so fun to be in Chicago a couple weeks ago and see some people at Datassential. But we do have so much more time in the day. My commute to downtown Chicago took me quite a while, so that's gone. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. I feel like I have more time in my day. And it seems like people in chat are saying they prefer routines now too.
Yeah, you are a spectacularly good diplomat, Marie. You gave your answer and you also professed your love for your teammates and coworkers. So
well,
thank you for
it's
that.
true.
Yeah, 80% of you prefer your routine these days versus before the pandemic. And this is broadly true of consumers too, not by quite the same margin, but about 2/3 prefer their routines today, despite the fact that they say their quality of life has actually gotten worse and their ability to have human contact has decreased substantially. They still actually like the routines more these days. How about more free time? Do you have more free time these days? Do you think other people have more free times these days? Let's take a look. Let's stop sharing this one and let's launch this one. What's most true? Do you have more free time today, or do you have more free time before the pandemic? How about you? Where's your free time gone?
I mean, I feel like with this question, I feel like it's a little easier than the last couple of polls. I feel like most people probably have more free time today than before the pandemic. Someone in chat just said that they couldn't have imagined doing things like grocery shopping or like dentist appointments and all of those things before the pandemic like they can now. So yeah.
So it's interesting. We're getting less sleep, but we have more free time. It's an interesting phenomenon, right? Like you would almost think that that's counterintuitive in some way. Right? But it's true. I mean, look, 3/4 of us say that we have more free time today than before the pandemic. And let's see what consumers have to say. 50%. I gave you a binary choice. In reality, we gave people the choice to say, didn't change. But by about the same ratio, twice as many said that they had more free time today versus less free time. So we got more free time, less human contact. Life has gotten worse, but we like our routines more. It is a serious soup of different sort of like phenomenon that is happening over there. So I want to show you how we're actually spending our time. So I'm going to show you just sort of like some of the simple math that we do over here. So there are a number of things that we ask people about. For each one of these sort of activities, do you never do this at all? You know, do you do it, but the frequency with which you did it hasn't changed much? Or, you know, are you doing it more these days or less these days? And if you take the difference between the more and the less number, that becomes the net gain or loss in that activity. So I'm going to show you some stuff that has gone up and down in terms of the levels of activity from people. So in chat, what are you doing more of these days? What are you doing less of these days? And let's see what consumers have to say. So the number one thing that people are doing the most more of these days is cooking at home, a plus 43% net differential. But yoga and meditation that we saw earlier was only a +4, a plus 43. But look at some of the other items over here too, like watching streaming services, watching YouTube, spending time on social media, watching regular TV, playing video games, a lot of zoning out, right? And we don't know for sure, but they seem to me like a lot of activities that could take place in bed, but before you actually fall asleep. So we got more time. Maybe we're even sitting in bed or on the couch longer than we used to. So we're sort of like in some state of rest, but not actually in a state of sleep, and spending a lot of time on a lot of these things. So I think the numbers I saw more recently is something like Gen Z spends like 7 or 8 hours a day on internet connected non-work activities in front of their device in some way. That's a lot of time to be spending with our devices and social media or doom scrolling on TikTok. We'll see how much longer it exists as a service, but I'm sure something else will replace it if it goes away. That's where our time tends to be going, although we are cooking at home more often. Second tier, other things we're doing a little bit more of. There's a number of food-related activities over here. Ordering groceries for delivery is more common. Having snacks in the morning or in the afternoon, or late night snacks. Ordering restaurant food for delivery. Actually paying attention to calorie counts on restaurant menus, probably in part because it's a little more prevalent than it had been before. And you can see some of the other items as well. Hobbies, you know, some healthy activities like going for a walk or a run, but a lot of food-related activities have increased as well. Now you can look at the flip side. What are some things that people have decreased? And that's what this looks like over here. So it's sort of an opposite order, but like people are being less romantic these days than they used to. Probably not a good thing. I don't know. Maybe it's a good thing. We could talk about that in a different way sometime. But if you go to the very, very bottom, the things where we see the biggest declines, going to the movies, which we all understand because everything's streaming now, and I don't think they've released a good movie in quite some time. And dining out at restaurants is down considerably as well. That doesn't mean people aren't getting restaurant food because they are ordering stuff for delivery. But even think about like QSR and fast casual places, or really specifically QSR with all the really small format stores that are debuting now, some that don't even have dining rooms anymore. There's some other stuff here too that I think is sort of concerning. Like look at this list of things that people are doing less of. Like I think most of these you could consider to be pretty healthy life activities, right? Going to the gym, spending time with friends and family, participating in community events, traveling, visiting, you know, museums and historic sites, dining out at restaurants, which is also a communal activity. The movies, I guess that's communal, but it's sort of weird because you're not talking to each other the entire time, but still sort of communal. We've gone from communal activities to solitary activities. Like we've given up romance and spending time with friends and family in favor of TikTok and YouTube largely. So that's sort of where we are today. That is how our time has changed in just these past 3 years, and it's pretty darn dramatic. Now, we almost covered some stuff last week that I think is important for us to cover, and it's why Marie is with us here today to make sure it does get covered. That has to do with just what's going on with healthiness, and there are 2 specific areas. Marie, I'm going to bring you in over here. This is the sort of types or modes of dieting that Americans currently practice, right? So a lot of people say I do a balanced, healthy diet. That's sort of generic, right? Reduced sodium diet, reduced sugar diet, high protein diet, reduced fat diet, flexitarian diet. I wanted to call our attention to something that's sort of highlighted in the middle there, which is intermittent fasting. And specifically because it is a little bit more of a specific type of a thing as opposed to a general, I just want to be balanced and healthy, or I'm just trying to cut down salt. It's like a specific practice in a way. I think most of you all know what an intermittent fasting is, but Marie, can you do like a 30-second overview of what it is and the different approaches there might be?
Yeah, sure. And I think on our next slide, we may have detailed some of that too. So fasting for some portion of your day. So some people may not eat until lunch, or some people may do like one full day every week and not eat at all. So some portion of your time where you're not consuming anything besides water or non-nutritive liquids.
So can you, like, what's the benefit? Like, why is this a thing? Like, what's the theory behind why this is good for you?
Yeah, I think to me, I think the biggest benefit people like about intermittent fasting is weight loss. I think that it usually shows pretty quick weight loss for people who try it. I also would say there's this notion of cell autophagy, meaning when you're not eating, your cells have a chance to repair themselves or get rid of bad cells in our bodies. So this notion of reducing inflammation or cleaning out your system, so to say, are huge perks, I think, to people who do it. But personally, I think that it gives you pretty quick weight loss is the most appealing thing.
So that's the part that's interesting, right? Because it wasn't that long ago that we said, oh, you should eat like 6 meals a day or something and be eating constantly throughout the day. And now it's like, just have one big meal and wait 24 hours. It's exact opposite. So is it a thing where like you could pick one or the other, you just don't want to be in the middle of the road? Like either eat all the time or eat, very little of the time, but both are equally good? Or is there a consensus now that intermittent fasting might be a better dietary practice? Or does it depend on what your goal is?
I think it definitely depends on what your goal is. There's also some research that shows it may be better for men versus women with our different biology. And I also thought it was interesting when we saw in that previous list how many people practice it. When I looked a little deeper into that data, it had pretty high % of consumers who have tried intermittent fasting, but then they gave it up. So I think that hints to it's not easy. It's maybe not a simple thing or maybe a fun thing to incorporate in your routine. So it's gotten so big in recent years. There's been a lot of adoption of it, but there's less people who are actually truly sticking with it.
Do you think that drugs like Ozempic and some of these sort of newer, I don't know if they're fads or not, things are going to become replacements for intermittent fasting or normal dietary practice? It certainly starts to feel like that, right?
Yeah, it does. I wonder about Ozempic in particular. I hope not. I think there's good science to show that intermittent fasting is beneficial for a lot of people. It may work well for you and improve your health. And you can't say the same for some of those drugs and quick fixes.
Yeah, but look, on the topic of fasting, you're right. Almost 90% of people that tried it say they've seen positive results. Almost 40% say those results were really, really dramatically positive in some way. But it is still quite new. About half have been doing it only for a short period of time so far. It is still a newer thing overall, but it's not brand new. It's not like it only, was introduced like a year ago. Those that are doing it tend to be still relatively new to it. And the majority have changed not just the frequency and timing of when they eat, but also specifically the foods that they eat as well. I think by our measure of, when we look at some of our trend data, this seems like one of those diets that is continuing to grow right now. And if we were to look at the same data a year from now, I would bet that number is going to be higher than we see today. So something to really think about. Now, what we see too is, how does this relate to restaurants? Intermittent fasters say they rely on restaurants less often compared to eating at home than than they would have if they weren't fasting intermittently. Right, 16% say they're relying on restaurants more versus 45% say they're using restaurants less. And as Marie mentioned, the primary goal for intermittent fasters, which is a pretty substantial portion of the population at this point, it's not 1 or 2%. It's like, I think it was like 30-something%, is primarily weight loss, but also some just protecting you from generally negative health conditions too. And I think it's those folks in that second bucket that are just trying to do stuff that's generally healthy for them that are going to be long-term intermittent fasters. One thing that we wanted to cover as well is, I like this superhero, a very scary superhero. Plant-based, we think there's just still so much potential, and we're sort of in like the 3rd generation of plant-based now. But that 1st generation really was all the plant-based meats, and I'm sure you've seen that some of that plant-based meat trend hasn't really continued to explode the way it has in the earlier days. And you have some folks that tried some plant-based meat products that are no longer actively engaged in the category. And we wanted to sort of diagnose a little bit of why that's been happening and look at sort of animal protein versus plant-based meat analogs and just what's happening over there. So one thing we did is we created a net favorability score for plant-based meat. So this means the percentage of people that that like plant-based meats, whether it's a burger or chicken or something like that, and you subtract from that the percentage of people that don't like plant-based meats, and you get a net favorability number that can be a positive number or a negative number. And what you start noticing is that that favorability score varies by the type of consumer. So if we look at generations, millennials and Gen Zers have a very, very net positive view of plant-based meats, right? Plus 37% for millennials, plus 24% for Gen Z. Boomers, not quite as much, and Gen Xers, not quite as much. So Gen Zers, millennials like it more, boomers like it less. In urban areas, favorability is higher, more so than in suburban and rural areas. And I thought this was interesting. Democrats like plant-based meats a lot more than Republicans do. I don't know if that really means anything that you could do much with, but it's always interesting to try to inflame the conversation whenever I can. So that's why I threw that in there. But there is a pretty big difference. Okay, so of people that have tried to consume or bought plant-based meat products in the past or ordered them at a restaurant, 66% have either stopped buying and consuming those products or have reduced their consumption of those products, right? Just 34% are buying them as much or more than they were initially. And we wanted to understand a little bit of, why, if you tried this, are you not engaging in plant-based meats as much as you used to? And the list sort of looks like this. Number one is, cost concerns. They do tend to be a little bit more of a premium, whether it's on the menu or in the store. Thought that they don't maybe taste quite as good as the original animal protein. The third one I think is interesting too, which is we know that a lot of consumers were initially interested in plant-based meats because of the perceived health benefit. And I think over time, they may not have, that health benefit may not have been reinforced to them as much as, it could have, or it should have been. And that sort of caused some people to pull back. So it's like, hey, why am I spending, extra for something that maybe doesn't taste quite as perfect as I want it to be, but it's still really good if I'm not getting the health benefit from it on the other side. So we think there's actually still quite a bit of potential over here for the category. There's that dog again. But hey, don't do that. So we think there's still quite a bit of potential for the category, but these are some of the drawbacks that we're seeing, and I think they need to be resolved if we want to get to that full level of potential. Hopefully the cost thing is going to work itself out in the long run, but the taste piece really should be continued to work on, to be worked on. So what tastes better? About half of people think that regular meat tastes better than the plant-based alternative. And if you look specifically at plant-based burgers or chicken, in each case, about 20% of people think you just can't really tell the difference versus the plant-based and the regular, authentic thing. In most cases, people think that there's either a difference, but it doesn't really bother them, or there's so much of a difference that it's just not as appealing. The first lesson in food is it's got to taste good. I mean, it's such a foundational thing, and plant-based is a huge leap over what we've had in prior generations. And that's why we think there's still so much potential for it. But I think there's still more taste refinement that's going to need to happen for this to be a true long-term substitute for a majority of consumers. We could certainly get there, but we probably just need to do a few more things to be there fully. So I just want to say, I think Datassential's perspective is huge opportunity. If you're an operator, you should continue to look to menu this. You maybe even want to consider expanding your offerings in the plant-based meat area. But I would look for ways to sort of enhance the overall flavor of those applications, make that burger a little bit more interesting, and add some other, toppings and stuff to it that really give it all the things that make it appealing to a consumer. And that really is the way forward. We actually see this in other categories too, right? Seafood is a good example. A lot of seafood applications tend to be very traditional, very, very classic. And oftentimes seafoods are more appealing to boomers than they are to Gen Z. But as soon as you take, that cut of fish and you put it inside of a taco with, a Korean hot sauce, it becomes super appealing to Gen Z also all of a sudden. So I think the same thing applies to plant-based meats. There's probably more we could do to dress it up and make it appealing across generations. Okay, so we actually finished more or less on time today. Carol, I want to thank you. I know it's a risky thing to raise your hand, and I have no idea what's going to be thrown at you, and we had no idea how it's going to go. I didn't know that we'd get the CEO of a restaurant association by luck of the draw. Seriously, big round of applause to Carol. Any
Thank you
parting
so much
thoughts
for
for us, Carol? I
including
mean,
me.
that was amazing.
I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you, Marie, thank you as well. We'll probably stay on for an extra 2 or 3 minutes and just close down the chat. If you have any questions about any of the topics we talked about today, a lot of this will be covered in future Report Pro content. But if you paste something in chat, we and Marie will sort of see what's there, and we'll try to answer some of those questions right now in the next probably 2 or 3 minutes before we shut down for good. For all of you, thank you again for joining us. We'll be back in 1 month. It is the first Thursday of each month at 12 p.m. Central. Who has a calendar? What day is the first Thursday of April?
That will be the 6th.
Yes, the
6th?
6th.
Yeah. So April 6th, 12 p.m. Central. We'll see you right here. Thanks, everybody.